My name is EILEEN Brooks, and I was born in 1924 in Portsmouth. Well, I can remember one thing. I was thinking, and last night we lived in Horndean, which was 10 miles out of Portsmouth, where we built a bungalow. But my mother took me, my sister and I, down to Portsmouth when the Queen and was Princess Elizabeth and Princess Margaret on the Royal Yacht Britannia. Went through Port on a visit. I must have been about 6 or 7.
What do you remember about seeing the young princesses and the ship?
The crowd was a bit that worried me most, because we had to catch a double-decker bus to go back to Horndean, and it was late at night. I was petrified. I didn't like the dark and that sort of thing, but well, my dad, as I said once before, was in the army, so we'd moved around quite a lot from Portsmouth. We went to Wiltshire and Aldershot and Catterick Camp up in Yorkshire, different places like that. I can always remember them. Oh, the schools that we went to and the Sunday schools that we went to, because we didn't have the same religion in each camp sort of thing. But my mother's motto was all road leads to heaven. That's how we were brought up. Sundays was always your best clothes you had to wear. You didn't go out looking dirty on a Sunday. I can remember when we were at Bovington camp after a few years, we danced to the maypole in those days, all in white dresses with the ribbons going underneath each other. Yeah, still got photographs of those sort of things that we did. We then, well, it was a slower life in those days. And I can remember when we went to school, I mean, you learnt your tables, and I can still do them now at my age. My grandchildren can't. They got to look on press a button somewhere on the machine before they know anything. It sticks in your mind.
And what were the teachers like?
Oh, lovely. Although when I got to the school after the 11, when went up to bigger school, they used a cane an awful lot. If you didn't behave, you got 6 of the best.
And were you ever caned?
Only once on my hands, because I was talking when I shouldn't have been talking to somebody while the teacher was talking. One bang on one hand and one on the other. It hurt my pride, I think, more than anything, to think I misbehaved, because you weren't allowed to in those days. I didn't do it again, mind. If you were told to be quiet, you were told to be quiet. That was it. We had prefects in those days where if you were late for school, you had to do 100 lines. I must not be late, and have it in by next morning. Well, you got told off at home for a start because you should be in bed and asleep. Mother had a go at you, or father, Well, if you do these things, you expect to be punished.
What do you think your mum and dad taught you and gave you?
Oh, I think respect for everybody. It doesn't hurt to be polite. You don't have to shout and bawl at each other. They always used to say, good manners never hurt anybody. Just little things like that. And I still do it. I taught my children to say please and thank you from a very early age. I still do with the great-grandson that I've got, or great-great-grandson, actually. My dad was in the Royal Artillery, and he was attached to the gun carriages and that sort of thing. They used to march round with them, and some had horses, different things like that, when they paraded round in front of the Queen. She was always at the tattoos.
When war started, you would have been 15. What are your memories about the start of the war?
Well, rationing food for a start. You know, we had ration books. You had to, only got a certain amount of food. And some of the things that weren't on rations, you had to queue up for hours to get something a bit extra. Well, for a start, you were rationed with meat. You only got 2 shillings worth for a week. I could have a banana because I was under 18 rather. But I only got 1 banana a week when I went in the naffy, that was. I've always been what I call a person that shares. So I probably would have given half of it to somebody else because they didn't have one. Yes, I'm still like it, still doing the same things. I can't bear to see anybody else struggling. If I've got something, I mean, I don't always share, I give it away. And then don't have enough myself, sort of thing, but I never complain about it. They say, well, why don't you eat a bit more, or why don't you do this, or why don't you spend something on yourself? But if it gives somebody else pleasure, that gives me pleasure as well. One little boy I helped when I was about 5, and it was on the way to school. We had snow on the ground, and he had, the little boys' school caps that they had in those days. His ears were quite red with the cold. So Joe mugged his ears. She took off her scarf and tied it around his chin over his ears to keep him warm. I can see myself doing it now. Poor old shuffle woman. Silly little things like that. But I always wanted somebody else to share with me. Mum and Dad used to tease me, and especially Dad. He'd send me out some sweets if I was playing with other children, And then if there's 6 of us, he'd only send 5 sweets. So I'd hand them all round to the other children, then screw up the bag and go on playing. It didn't matter that I hadn't had one. So in a few minutes after, he'd come out and he'd say, I think I've counted wrong. I was 1 short, wasn't I? So he'd give me a sweet, but I never bothered to go and say I hadn't got one. My sister would have taken hers first. And if there wasn't one for somebody else, that was tough.
So in 1941, when you were aged 17, you joined up and you started to work at Bovington, didn't you? At the army camp there.
That's right, yes. You couldn't. I wanted to join the ATS. My sister had to when you were 18, but I was only 17. So I went down to the Labour Exchange on my 17th birthday, and they were recruiting for the NAFI at Bovington, or at least the NAFI. And of course, where did they post me? Bovington camp. And that was, hard work, because in those days you didn't have you had a needle and mat and a bucket of water and a scrubbing brush to do the floor. You didn't get it mopped to mop it over quickly. Or where you slept on the premises, in the rooms were in the the side of the canteen. So we had to get it dressed and get across to the kitchen then to start up, we'd light the fire with sticks and coal to boil the copper things up and get hot water and that sort of thing. Of course, we had to get the tea made in big urns for the men to come in at 10 o'clock to p:30. And the cigarettes we sold were in boxes of 500. So you had to count out 10 and sell them to the troops. They were rationed sort of thing.
So you were at Bovington camp for 2.5 years. When you think back to those 2.5 years, what are your fondest memories of working there?
I think one of the things that sticks out recently in my mind is the fact that, excuse me, on a Sunday night, with the canteen shut at 9:30, that EILEEN was always singing on a Sunday night to the troops on the radio sort of thing, and you wouldn't dare drop a pin on the floor. These soldiers were all sat round the radio listening to what she was singing, and that's still very obvious in my mind sort of thing. It's one that I treasure most, and I've got it on the music centre, is one of the songs, I'll Be Loving You Always. Always was the name of the song. I still love my husband. He's been gone 26 years now. I'll always love him. That was the first time I went to cinema with him, and she was on, and whether it was a film or whether it was a program on the film, that was what she was singing, and it's just one of my favourite ones, you know.
So in 1945, EILEEN, you went to work in grading eggs in Dorchester, and that's where you met your husband, didn't you?
Yes, that's right. My husband used to go round in a van to pick up the eggs from the farms and then bring them back to Dorchester Market, which was where this cafe is now. That was what they call a grading station. And we had to candle them, as they call it first, which you put 2 eggs underneath lights to see if there's any chicks inside. And then you put them on another part of the machine that grades it into the different size eggs and what price you paid for them. And the cracked eggs that was broken into a big 7-pound jam jar thing, or what they used to have jam in those days, and go up to the top of town cafe, and she used to make sponge cakes and stuff with them.
So you and Dick were married in 45, and you were married for over 50 years.
We had a nice wedding. I went to Bournemouth to get a wedding dress. I got one there for £11, a bridal dress, if you can remember. And then we went dancing down at Weymouth there was a pier, what they call the pier bandstand in Weymouth, which is cut off now. But we were dancing there when the war ended. Then in the evening we went down to the bottom of the town by the river, and we had a dance there, music and dancing, and all the people that couldn't come to reception, we had the evening party for. We stopped at the White Hart Hotel there for the night. Then next day we went to the Isle of Wight for our honeymoon.
Now, I know one of the strongest memories you've got of the war is when your uncle was killed. Tell me about that.
My Aunt Edith, as her name was then, her husband was in the Navy. He used to she was looking after my grandmother, her mother, before she was married. Then she got married in Portsmouth, and her husband went back on the ships again. And she whenever he was moving from one base to another, you weren't allowed with secrets to, tell anybody. But they had a code of, as it was Portland that they came into. He started the letter off sort of thing, precious girl, how are you, or something like that. So it started with a P, so she could trace round where he was. So she came to stay in our house, which was in Dorchester, and we could see the smoke from a back bedroom window. You could see the smoke where the boat went up when he bombed it. That was in July 44.
And what happened? His ship was sunk in Portland Harbour?
That's right. Yes, it was blown up. There was only one man, I think, that came off alive. It was the Foyle Bank was the name of the ship he was on in Portland Harbour. He's actually buried up in the cemetery there. It was devastating. I had to learn to have faith. Well, I had faith that, these things are sent for a purpose. I could never quite see why, but obviously it was.
EILEEN, can I ask you, how have you coped during the lockdown, during the COVID pandemic? What has life been like for you?
Inwardly, if I speak the honest truth, I was absolutely, I felt so lonely. People couldn't come in. The carers could, just to do the bits, but they had fur masks and aprons and gloves and all that on. And then to sit and try and eat a dinner or something like that, I just didn't fancy it. I could have shared it with somebody. I would have given, or given it to them for company. But the loneliness is, I think, one of the worst things anybody can have. As I said, it's just the fact that you couldn't meet up with people. I could sit out the front here, but I had to be quite a distance from anybody. And I couldn't get up the slope here in my wheelchair by myself. And I couldn't get anybody to take me out for a walk or anything. So I did feel very lonely, would be the word. Although I've got two sons and granddaughters and all, they were all away from me, They'd phone up, things like that. But just somebody to talk to.
So how did you deal with those early weeks? How did you deal with that isolation and that loneliness?
I got right down to the bottom. Then I was always taught when you get down low and you're down the bottom, there's only one way, and that's back up again. So I had to find something then to try and get myself back on track, shall we say.
And EILEEN, tell me what it's been like for you today to talk to me.
Oh, I love talking to people and listen. I listen. I don't just talk all the time, but I love to hear other people's, what they do and how they do it and where they go. And, I don't wish to be nosy and personal to them, if you know what I mean. I just like to know the things that they've done in the past. I'm quite happy to chat to people. As I said, I don't want people to, tell me their business or anything like that. That's not, not personal. But I like to have a bit of fun.
And I have to say, it's been lovely chatting with you today. So thank you so much.
Oh, you're very welcome. I wish people would do more of it. Just being friendly. As I said, you don't have to, do big things. And, cup of tea and a bun or a cup of tea and a biscuit, and things like that.
It's about being kind and just listening to people, isn't it?